The kitchen was a disaster zone. Not just dishes, but like, flour explosions and egg yolk shrapnel everywhere. I'm pretty sure I saw a rogue carrot slice do a dive bomb into the sink. And this was after the whole thing where my dad and his brother were trying to make that fancy bread. The one with the sourdough starter that looked like something you'd find in a swamp. And they were arguing about the yeast. Loudly. Like it was a matter of national security. My dad insisted it was the active kind, and his brother was like, "It's clearly instantaneous, you dolt." The whole house vibrated with their culinary indignation. My mom just sat there, reading a magazine about knitting patterns, completely unfazed. You know how it is. I just poured myself a glass of water. The tap water tasted like old pennies that day. Or maybe it was just the anxiety leaking from the yeast debate. I remember thinking, is this it? Is this how I spend my weekends now? Mediating bread-related wars? It was Tuesday. Or maybe Wednesday. The days all kind of bled together when that kind of drama was unfolding. Then my dad, he slammed the bag of flour down so hard the entire cupboard door sprung open. And this little ceramic gnome, the one my aunt gave them years ago, it just tumbled out. It landed on the tile floor with this pathetic little tink. It didn't even break, which was almost worse. Just sat there, its painted smile mocking the whole situation. I swear, I could feel a headache brewing behind my eyeballs. Like a tiny, angry hummingbird trapped in my skull. My dad's brother, he just pointed a flour-dusted finger at him. "See? Your recklessness is costing us." And my dad, he just stared at the gnome. For a good minute. Then he picked it up. Smoothed its little hat. And he said, "This is fine. Everything is fine." Which, let me tell you, was the biggest load of horse feathers I'd heard all week. I just walked out. Went to my room. Sat on my bed. The springs were squeaking like a distressed mouse colony. I opened my laptop. Pulled up that investment platform. The one I'd been quietly building up since I was 18. You know, the one they all said I'd never be able to manage. The one they insisted I'd always need their guidance for. My dad, bless his clueless heart, thought anything over $100 was practically gambling with the devil. And his brother, he was more about, like, savings bonds and certificates of deposit. Anything that moved slower than molasses. So, I logged in. Saw the balance. It was significant. More than significant. It was enough to make me feel like I could disappear to a small island and live on coconuts and good intentions for the rest of my life. And no one would ever know. Not them, anyway. My dad's yelling was still audible through the door, a muffled roar about gluten structure. I just closed the laptop. Leaned my head back against the wall. The paint there was peeling a bit. It smelled faintly of dust and regret. I remember thinking about that time when I was 15. I'd asked him for $100 for a concert ticket. He'd made me write a whole damn business plan for how I'd earn it back. I ended up selling my old comic books. Made $75. He still lectured me about the deficit. So yeah. That was it. Anyway. The gnome is still on their counter. I saw it last week. Its smile is still there. Creepy little thing. The smell of burnt sugar and something vaguely chemical, I think it was a bottle of something meant to make bread rise faster. But it clearly did the opposite, was thick in the air. My dad's voice, usually a rumbling baritone that could soothe a herd of wild elephants, was stretched taut, like a rubber band about to snap. "It's about the hydration, Brian. You're not listening." His brother, Brian, or Uncle Brian as he was to me, responded with a sound that was somewhere between a choked laugh and a snort. "Hydration? You're drowning the poor thing in tap water. It's a sourdough starter. Not a goldfish." I was in the hallway, pretending to look for a book I'd already read 3 times. The book was about a detective who solved crimes using only cheese. It was surprisingly detailed. The hallway itself was a study in beige. Beige carpet, beige walls. And a framed print of a single, solitary tree that looked like it was contemplating its own existence. The smell of the kitchen was so potent it was seeping under the door like a toxic gas. Mom, she was in the living room, the muffled murmur of the television providing a soundtrack to the domestic chaos. She was watching a documentary about competitive dog grooming. The poodle in the lead was getting a haircut that involved a lot of geometric shapes. It was mesmerizing in its own way. She'd learned to tune out the bread battles years ago. It was a survival skill, I think. Like knowing how to hold your breath underwater. I traced a pattern on the dusty surface of a side table with my finger. The dust motes danced in the sliver of light that managed to penetrate the hallway's inherent dimness. There was a faint scent of lemon polish, battling valiantly against the yeasty aroma of impending doom. My dad was now explaining, at an alarming volume, the difference between a poulish and a baiga. I didn't even know those were things. I thought bread just happened. You put flour and water in a bowl and then it was bread. This was significantly more complicated. And louder. Uncle Brian countered with a detailed, and frankly, quite passionate, explanation of the precise temperature range for optimal yeast activation. He used hand gestures that involved a lot of fluttering fingers and pointing. It was like watching a bird trying to explain quantum physics. You know how it is. Suddenly, a loud thump followed by a clatter. I flinched. It sounded like a small appliance had met its end. I took a deep breath, the air feeling thick and heavy. For God's sake, Arthur. You're going to break something else. Uncle Brian's voice was laced with a weariness that was almost palpable, even from down the hall. My dad, Arthur, responded with a huff. It's the flour, Brian. It's just volatile. Volatile flour. That was a new one. My brain, in its infinite capacity to deflect, immediately went to a completely unrelated thought. I need to call the dentist about that chipped tooth. It's been bothering me. I should probably do that before it gets worse. Maybe they have an opening this week. I heard the distinct sound of a cupboard door being wrenched open, followed by a cascade of what sounded like ceramic objects. A high-pitched, brittle tink that echoed through the house. My dad had a collection of these little ceramic figures. Garden gnomes, tiny little elves, miniature wizards. They were usually perched precariously on shelves, monuments to his brief, inexplicable hobbies. A beat of silence. A heavy, pregnant pause. The dog, a golden retriever named Barnaby who usually had the attention span of a gnat, was now absolutely silent. Even he knew to stay out of the kitchen during bread wars. Then, Uncle Brian's voice, quieter now, but with an edge that was sharper than any knife. You absolute Arthur. Look what you've done. I pictured it. A small, painted figure, tumbling from its perch. Landing on the unforgiving tile. Its little painted smile probably still intact. Mocking them. Mocking the whole ridiculous situation. My dad's voice, when it came, was surprisingly calm. Too calm. It's fine, Brian. It's fine. The words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the recent auditory assault. It wasn't fine. It was, in fact, spectacularly not fine. The entire house smelled like a bakery that had exploded. There were flour footprints leading from the pantry, across the living room rug, and all the way to the front door. I'd seen them earlier. They were Barnaby's, I suspected. He had a habit of helping. I knew that look in my dad's voice. The one that meant he was trying to smooth things over, to pretend the earthquake hadn't happened. It was the same look he had when he'd accidentally backed the car into the mailbox and then tried to convince Mom it was already broken. I made a decision. A small, quiet rebellion. I pushed myself off the wall, the beige carpet sighing under my weight. I walked towards my room. The door creaked open, and then shut behind me with a soft click, a sound of finality. My room. It was my sanctuary. A place where the scent of yeast and existential dread didn't penetrate. It smelled faintly of old paper and the faint, sweet perfume of a forgotten air freshener. My bed was a chaotic landscape of blankets and pillows. The springs, as I sat down, let out a series of protesting squeaks. It sounded like a tiny, wounded animal. I pulled out my laptop. The screen flickered to life, bathing my face in its cool, blue glow. The investment platform. This was my secret garden. My little corner of the world where I made the rules. Where the only debates were about market trends and risk assessment. Not whether the yeast was active or instantaneous. The numbers on the screen swam into focus. The balance. It wasn't just good. It was impressive. More than impressive. It was the kind of number that made you think about all the things you could do. All the places you could go. All the people you could avoid. You know how it is. The muffled sounds of argument from the kitchen were still there. A low hum of discontent. Something about gluten development. I tried to tune it out. I focused on the screen. The steady, reassuring growth. It was like watching a plant grow. But instead of water and sunlight, it was powered by compound interest and sound financial decisions. I remembered asking Dad for $50 when I was 16. For a new video game. He'd sat me down and explained, in excruciating detail, the concept of opportunity cost. He'd then proceeded to show me a spreadsheet he'd made outlining the potential returns if that $50 had been invested in a diversified portfolio of blue-chip stocks over a 10-year period. The video game, he concluded, was a poor investment choice. I ended up watching him play solitaire for 3 hours. I closed the laptop. The screen went black. The silence in my room felt vast. The paint on the wall above my bed was peeling in a way that looked like a miniature mountain range. It smelled of old paint and the faint, metallic tang of my own frustration. I thought about that time my mom tried to teach me how to knit. She'd shown me the basic stitch. Then she'd gotten a call about a sale at the yarn store. She'd left me with the needles and a ball of yarn. I'd ended up with a tangled mess that looked more like a bird's nest gone wrong than a scarf. She'd just nodded, patted my head, and said, "Well, you tried." I stood up. Walked over to the window. Outside, the sky was a dull, overcast gray. The trees were bare. It was the kind of weather that made you want to stay inside and contemplate the futility of it all. I opened the closet door. Pulled out a duffel bag. It was old. The canvas was faded. It had been my gym bag in high school. It smelled faintly of sweat and forgotten dreams. I started throwing things into it. Clothes. Toiletries. My favorite book about the cheese detective. I didn't need a plan. I didn't need a business proposal. I just needed out. Out of the smell of yeast and the sound of arguments. Out of the beige hallways and the peeling paint. I zipped up the bag. It was surprisingly heavy. I hefted it onto my shoulder. The springs on my bed let out another mournful squeak. The yelling from the kitchen had subsided. Replaced by a tense, simmering silence. A prelude to the next inevitable bread-related explosion. I walked out of my room. Down the hallway. Past the solitary tree print. Towards the front door. Barnaby was lying on the rug, his tail giving a tentative thump-thump against the floor. He watched me go with his big, brown eyes. He probably thought I was going for a walk. I opened the front door. The air outside was cool and damp. It smelled of wet earth and car exhaust. It was a welcome change. I stepped out. Pulled the door shut behind me. The click of the latch was loud in the sudden quiet. I didn't look back. I just started walking. No destination in mind. Just away. I'll skip the part about finding a ride. Or the part about the bus station. Or the part about the questionable diner where I ate a sandwich that tasted suspiciously like regret. Those parts are boring. And frankly, I'm not in the mood to relive them. What I will say is this, I drove for a while. The radio played a song I vaguely remembered from my childhood. It was about a dancing bear. I sang along, badly. My voice cracked. It sounded like a dying seal. I found myself at a gas station. It was late. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting a sickly yellow glow on the desolate landscape. The air smelled of gasoline and stale coffee. I bought a bag of chips that tasted like flavored cardboard. And a bottle of water. It tasted like water. A small victory. I sat in the car. The engine was off. The silence was profound. No yelling. No flower explosions. Just the distant hum of the highway and the occasional rumble of a passing truck. I thought about my dad. And his brother. Their epic quest for the perfect loaf. Their culinary gladiatorial combat. It was absurd. And yet. Familiar. It was the soundtrack to my childhood. The soundtrack to my weekends. I looked at my hands. They were clean. No flour. No egg yolk. Just hands. Capable hands. Hands that knew how to navigate a spreadsheet. Hands that could build something. Something that wasn't a lopsided sourdough loaf. I remember thinking about that time when I was 13. I'd tried to fix my bike chain. It had snapped. I'd ended up with grease all over my face and hands. My dad had come out, seen the mess, and sighed. He then proceeded to explain, in great detail, the physics of chain tension and the proper application of lubricant. I'd ended up with a slightly greasy but functional chain. And a lecture. So yeah. That was it. Anyway. The gnome is still on their counter. I saw it last week. Its smile is still there. Creepy little thing.